Leyden-Wanger's Communities of Practice Learning Theory. So related major educational or learning theories to the communities of practice are constructivism, where learning is an active constructive process. All knowledge is constructed from the learner's previous knowledge, regardless of teaching. So this relates because in the communities of practice, the learning happens within that community, within the questions, within the problems that they tackle. So to me, that comes from constructivism. And also related to Vygotsky's social development theory. So in that theory, students play an active role in learning and the teacher shifts to a collaborator. And in communities of practice, the students are definitely playing an active role in their learning. There's also a slight connection to Albert Bandura's social learning theory, meaning that in his theory, people learn from one another. And in the communities of practice, they are learning from each other in these groups. And I think that it's important that 21st century learning gets mentioned here too, because as I delved into researching communities of practice, I often was thinking about how this theory connected to 21st century learning, especially in thinking about the need for collaboration, the fact that we are so globalized now and how important that collaboration is and that connection is. So I really thought that it ties in well, and I'll talk about that again a little bit later. So the elements of communities of practice, there's a combination of three elements that make up a community of practice: community, domain, and practice. So in community, the people come together because they share a concern or a passion, and they want to learn how to increase their knowledge, improve their performance, or solve problems as they interact. Within this community, it's made up of people of varying degrees of knowledge or expertise already in the practice. In the domain, their identity is defined by a shared domain interest, but it's not merely just a friendship group. The membership actually demonstrates the commitment that they have and the shared competencies that they have. And practice. So members are actual practitioners, not just a group of interested people. So they get together, and then as they answer questions or dive more into details or try to find more out, they're actually building a variety of resources together. And I think this is one of the key things that made me think, this might not work as well as I wanted it to in my classroom. Because members as practitioners means that there are at least one, maybe two, maybe even more really skilled people within the group. And I'm not sure how I would create that for my classroom. But anyway, this is the third component of the communities of practice. In thinking about the relevancy to education and to learning, I think that the early work with this theory was focused on apprenticeships. And it's interesting because we were just reading about apprenticeships again last week. So apprenticeships themselves have proven effective overall, but they've fallen out of favor, although there's renewed interest in apprenticeships now in their place in education. Participation in talking within and talking about supports memory and reflection. So the both forms of talk serve specific purposes: engaging, focusing, and shifting attention, coordination. And for myself as a teacher of writing, I know how important their knowledge is. They need a strong background and a lot of content knowledge to be able to write about a specific topic. For example, at the beginning of the year, I always start with personal narrative as their first writing piece because they are an expert in their own lives. They have that background knowledge already. It's not something that they have to research and gain knowledge about and then write. So I recognize how important it is that they be able to have knowledge and really being able to talk about their knowledge. And because essentially writing is talking on paper. So you have to be able to write, to talk about it, to be able to write about it. Connection to 21st century learning skills. According to Tina Chingren in her paper, An Exploration of Communities of Practice, increasingly a key issue for knowledge management is fostering human interaction and enables this exchange of knowledge. Observing, listening, practicing, questioning, debating, and collaborating have all become part of a prosperous knowledge-sharing environment. In this knowledge-based global economy, we need learning based on team, collective performance, as well as cooperation and collaboration. And then shifting from focusing on cognitive processes and conceptual structures to what kinds of social engagements provide the context for learning to take place. This makes me think of programs in schools such as responsive classroom and developmental design, as well as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In Nicole Leach's article, Peer Bonds in Urban School Communities, she addresses the fact that education is a social process and that the role of peers is vital, especially in adolescence when peers have considerable influence. She goes on to say that friends play an important role on students' academic success. Positive friendships have been linked to increased academic outcomes, whereas negative friendships affect maladjustment to school. This can also circle back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the importance of addressing social needs. So I can see this being really relevant to education and learning if things are in place and work well. So if you're in a school that's using responsive classroom or developmental design and you've built that really strong community within your classroom where people take care of each other and look out for each other, then I think that you would be able to put something in place like a community of practice. But if it's a situation where kids don't feel safe to share their ideas, they're certainly not going to be able to learn from each other. The theory evaluation. Does this theory appear to have good utility to the field of education? Much of the information and application of communities of practice have been within the alternative situations than the classroom, though it has been applied for professional development for teachers. I think that as far as apprenticeships go, it definitely has a solid place. I think that it's possible to maybe make some adjustments to it to make it work maybe at the middle school level, potentially like intermediate elementary. But I think if you make too many changes, then you're shifting to a different learning theory. So is this theory too far-reaching? I do think that the theory has potential, especially with the shifting focus in education to the 21st century skills. That ability to collaborate, communicate, learn from each other is vital to where our kids are going in the world that they live in. Does this theory fail to consider important variables, factors, or processes? Yes, it does. Initially, I chose this theory because it seemed like it was the basis of the program I use for reading and writing. Set up, they work in coalition groups to tackle topics of interest, ways that they want to make a difference in the world. They meet in book clubs, really puts the students at the center of it. But the more I dug in, I realized that this theory wasn't what I thought it was. But I decided to stick with it because I had gathered so much information already. I think there are some limitations in the classroom, such as the group members being the practitioners, so being the experts already. I think it's going to be challenging to try to set up a situation where anybody other than the teacher or another adult is, that practitioner with the experience and the knowledge that the others are learning from. Potentially in a situation like if you're doing a school-wide theme and you've got older kids partnered up with younger kids, that might be a place where it could apply. I suppose it can be pulled off with a lot of careful planning. I'm not sure I have the ideas in place to be able to tackle it yet. In the article, Learning Citizenship Through Social Participation Outside and Inside School, the authors point out that schools and classrooms as communities of practice, will have to shift the main focus from acquisition of subject knowledge to the social practices of both teachers and students. So this certainly leads to assessment issues. And if really what you're planning your unit around is the social interaction and not the depth of knowledge. Is this theory grounded in research? Yes and no. There is research pertaining to this theory with adults and with apprenticeships. There is not a lot of research for the application in schools. According to the article, Brief Introduction to Communities of Practice by Etienne Wenger, changing the learning theory in schools is a much deeper transformation.